The winter sun was already weak when Caleb Morgan rode higher into the desert mountains. He had planned to bring his cattle home before the snow arrived, but the weather turned faster than expected. The sky grew heavy, gray, and silent in a way that warned him something dangerous was coming. Caleb had lived his whole life on the ranch. He knew the signs of a serious storm. Still, he pushed forward, hoping to find at least 3 missing cows before turning back. He didn't like leaving anything lost on his land, even if it meant riding into cold wind that cut through his coat. His horse, Dusty, moved slowly through the rising gusts, ears flicking at the sound of distant thunder. The tall pines bent as if bowing to the winter wind. Caleb kept one hand on the reins and one close to his scarf, pulling it tighter around his neck. He whispered to Dusty, trying to keep him calm. Snowflakes began to fall, small at first, then thicker, spinning in the air until the world ahead turned blurry. Caleb let out a frustrated breath. He knew he should return home, but he also knew the cattle would not survive the night if they were trapped somewhere out here. He guided Dusty along the ridge, hoping to spot tracks before the snow covered them. But the storm grew stronger with every step. The sky dimmed. The wind cried across the stones, and he could barely see past the horse's ears. Just when he decided to turn around, something unusual caught his eye. A dark shape near a canyon wall. It didn't look like an animal. It didn't move with the wind. It looked like a person. Caleb quickly steered Dusty toward the figure, his heart tightening with worry. No one should be out here alone in a storm like this. As he got closer, he saw a woman lying half buried in the snow, her long black hair tangled by the wind. She wore clothes made of animal hide, decorated with beads and patterns he recognized from the Apache tribes that lived miles east. Her skin looked pale from the cold, and she wasn't moving. Caleb jumped off his horse and knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked gently. Her eyelids fluttered, just barely. She tried to speak, but all he heard were soft breaths and a weak whisper he couldn't understand. Her hands were freezing, and her body shook with the kind of cold that scared him. Caleb knew one thing for certain: if he left her here, she wouldn't survive. But he also knew taking her with him might bring trouble. Relations between ranchers and native tribes were tense, even though Caleb himself avoided conflict. Still, the storm did not care about old lines drawn between people. This woman needed help, and he was the only one around to give it. With careful movements, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and her body was stiff from the cold. He placed her across Dusty's saddle and climbed up behind her, holding her steady so she wouldn't fall. Dusty snorted and stepped nervously, but Caleb patted the horse's neck. "Easy, boy. We're taking her to shelter." He had planned to ride home, but the storm had turned wild. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow slammed into them sideways. Dusty struggled to walk, and Caleb squinted through the white blur, searching for any place they could wait out the storm. He remembered an old line shack built decades ago by rail workers. It was small and nearly forgotten, but it was closer than the ranch. Caleb guided Dusty toward the canyon, hoping the shack still stood. The cold clawed at his face, and the woman's shivering grew worse. Caleb wrapped one arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer to keep her steady. He didn't know her name or her story, but he knew she was fighting to stay alive. After what felt like hours, Caleb finally saw the outline of a wooden structure half covered by snow. Relief washed through him. He rushed Dusty forward, stopped near the door, and carried the woman inside. The shack was cold and dark, but at least it blocked the wind. He laid her gently on the floor and quickly closed the door behind them. Inside the shack, he searched for anything usable. There was an old fire pit in the corner, some broken crates, and a dusty stack of wood left by travelers long ago. Caleb dropped to his knees and began building a fire. His hands moved quickly, striking flint until sparks caught. Soon, small flames grew into a warm fire that filled the shack with orange light. He turned to check on the woman. Her lips were pale, and her shivering had not stopped. Caleb took off his coat and wrapped it around her. She opened her eyes slightly, studying him with confusion and fear. He spoke softly. You're safe. Just stay still and warm up. She tried to speak again. This time, he heard her faint voice. Cold. Too cold. I know, he answered. The fire will help. But as minutes passed, she still looked weak and unable to warm herself. Caleb worried the cold had sunk too deep. He remembered something old ranchers and travelers always said. When a night storm hits this hard, a fire isn't enough to keep someone alive if their body has already frozen too much. Just then, the woman whispered something barely audible. He leaned closer. We'll freeze. If we don't stay close. Her words were thin, shaky, but clear. Caleb felt his pulse jump. She wasn't wrong. The shack was cold, the storm was fierce, and her body had no strength left. She needed shared warmth to survive. The same way lost travelers sometimes saved each other during harsh winters. Caleb hesitated. He was a quiet, respectful man, careful with boundaries. This woman came from a culture very different from his own. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but she wasn't speaking from fear or shame, she was speaking from knowledge, from survival. She knew the land better than he did. He looked at the fire, then at her trembling form. The storm outside roared so loud it shook the wooden walls. He understood he didn't have a real choice. It was life or death. Caleb sat down beside her and gently lifted her closer to the fire. He kept a respectful distance, giving her space. But she shook her head weakly. No, close, she whispered. Storm is strong, cold steals. Breath. He swallowed hard and nodded. Slowly, he sat behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders, sharing as much warmth as he could without causing discomfort. Her breathing steadied a little, and her body slowly relaxed. She wasn't unconscious anymore, but she was still weak, leaning lightly against him because she had no strength left to sit on her own. Caleb stared into the fire, listening to the storm slam against the shack. He felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his chest. He didn't know who she was, or why she was out here alone, but he knew he couldn't leave her. Not tonight. Not in this storm. Hours passed slowly. The fire crackled softly, and the woman's shivering eased. At one point, she opened her eyes again and whispered, "Thank you." Caleb didn't answer for a while. He didn't know what to say. Finally, he replied quietly, "You're welcome. Rest. When the storm ends, we'll figure out the rest." She nodded weakly and closed her eyes again, trusting him in a way that surprised him. He didn't know how long they would be trapped here, or what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: the storm had forced their worlds together, and nothing about this night would be easy to forget. The storm did not end with the morning. When Caleb woke, the wind was still pounding against the wooden walls, and snow pushed through the cracks like cold smoke. The tiny shack felt more like a box trapped inside a white world. Caleb sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the Apache woman resting beside him. She was no longer trembling, but her breathing was tired and shallow. He checked the fire. The flames had shrunk to soft embers, glowing red like warm stones. Caleb added more wood, until the fire grew again. The warmth spread through the shack, pushing back some of the morning cold. He glanced at the woman, wondering whether she would wake soon. A few minutes later, she opened her eyes. They were dark and sharp, but tired. She watched him without speaking, as if trying to decide whether he was friend or stranger. Caleb nodded politely, giving her space. "Morning," he said quietly. "How are you feeling?" She tried to sit up but stopped halfway, wincing when she put weight on her ankle. Caleb reached out slightly, not touching her, just offering support. She steadied herself and gave him a small nod, as if thanking him without words. "You were nearly frozen last night," Caleb explained. "Storm caught us both." She looked around the shack slowly, taking everything in. Her clothes were dry now, thanks to the fire, and Caleb's coat was draped around her shoulders. She touched it gently, then looked back at him. "I remember," she whispered. "You helped me." "You needed help," Caleb answered simply. He didn't try to make himself sound heroic. Helping someone in danger was just the right thing to do. She studied him again with calm, careful eyes. He could tell she wasn't used to trusting easily. Finally, she spoke. "My name is Nayeli." Caleb nodded. "I'm Caleb Morgan." Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable but cautious, like two people standing on opposite sides of a river trying to decide if they should build a bridge. Outside, the storm growled, shaking snow off the roof. Caleb stood and walked to the narrow window. Thick white wind swirled outside, blocking everything beyond a few feet. "We won't be able to leave today," he said softly. Nayeli followed his gaze. Her expression didn't change much, but he could see a shadow of worry cross her face. She shifted her ankle again and winced. Caleb crouched beside her, careful with his movements. "Your ankle is swollen," he said. "You took a bad fall, didn't you?" She hesitated but finally nodded. "I slipped on the rocks yesterday. I kept walking because I needed to reach my people before outsiders did." Caleb tilted his head slightly. "Outsiders?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a few slow breaths, gathering her thoughts. Caleb stayed quiet, giving her time. Outside, the wind howled like a beast, losing patience. The shack creaked, but Caleb knew it would hold. It always had. At last, Nayeli spoke. "3 men were riding through our hunting grounds. They said they were scouting for new land. But they were not honest. They were looking for places to take." Her voice stayed soft, but her eyes burned with meaning. "My family needed to know before it was too late." Caleb felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew some land barons had been pushing farther west, always looking for more space, more grass, more control. Some were peaceful neighbors, others were not, and he had seen the damage caused when people didn't respect boundaries. "You were trying to warn them," he murmured. She nodded. "I thought I could reach them before snow blocked the paths." Caleb felt respect rise in him. She wasn't out here for herself. She was carrying responsibility that many people twice her size couldn't handle. He pulled a small tin from his saddlebag, some dried meat and crackers he kept for emergencies. He placed them beside her. "Eat. You need strength." Nayeli looked at the food for a moment, then gave him a quick nod of thanks and ate slowly, carefully. Caleb stayed by the fire, warming his hands. The shack felt different now, not as strange, not as fragile. 2 people who knew nothing about each other were now sharing the same fight against the cold. After she finished eating, Caleb spoke again. "We'll be stuck here until the storm settles. Could be hours. Could be the whole day." Nayeli wrapped the coat tighter around her. "Then we wait." Caleb admired her calm patience. Most people would be panicking, but she seemed used to harsh land and difficult journeys. Still, she watched him with the same careful eyes. Trust did not come easily. To pass the time, Caleb worked on fixing the broken door latch. Snow kept forcing its way inside, and every handful made the shack colder. He used a rusted nail and scrap wood to secure the door better. Nayeli watched him for a while, then asked quietly, "You live near here?" Caleb shook his head. "My ranch is about 3 hours south. I was searching for cattle when the storm came." She considered his answer, then said softly, "You risked a lot bringing me here." "The wind was strong enough to push a horse off a ridge. I wasn't going to leave you," Caleb replied. He looked up from the latch and met her eyes. "Storms don't show mercy. Someone has to." Her expression softened slightly. Not a smile, not yet, but something human and grateful. As the hours passed, they spoke in small pieces. She asked about ranch life, about animals and seasons. He asked about the mountains, about the plants she used for healing. Their words were gentle, simple, without pushing too deep. The distance between them slowly changed, not entirely gone, but no longer sharp. At one point, the shack shook with a strong gust of wind, and Nayeli tensed. Caleb glanced at her. "Don't worry. These walls may look old, but they've survived storms worse than this." She looked around thoughtfully. "It is strange," she murmured. Two people from different worlds sitting in the same firelight. Caleb chuckled softly. Storms don't care where you come from. A quiet moment followed. Nayeli looked into the fire, her face thoughtful. Caleb wondered what memories she was carrying, and what weight she held on her shoulders. He didn't ask. He sensed she would tell him when she was ready. Later in the afternoon, Caleb checked the door again. The wind had slowed a little, but not enough. Still not safe, he muttered. Nayeli shifted her ankle carefully. When the storm ends, I must continue. My family needs the warning. Caleb frowned. Not alone. Not with your ankle, but she shook her head. I cannot ask a rancher to enter our lands. My people may think you come with a reason. Caleb understood the tension behind her words. History had not made their communities friends. Even so, he felt a strange tug in his chest at the idea of letting her walk away injured. He respected her spirit, her strength, and her quiet courage. As the sky darkened again, Caleb added more wood to the fire. The shack glowed warm against the cold outside. Nayeli wrapped the coat around herself and leaned against the wall, her eyes slowly closing. She was tired, but safe. Caleb sat a few feet away, listening to the wind grow softer. He didn't know how long the peace would last. But for now, they were alive. For now, they were sheltered. And for the first time since the storm began, the distance between them felt less like a wall and more like a path they had not yet walked. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Tomorrow decisions would have to be made. But tonight, inside a tiny shack, lost in the White Mountains, two strangers shared warmth, silence, and a fragile sense of trust neither expected to find. The storm finally weakened during the late morning of the next day. Caleb pushed open the shack door and saw a world covered in deep white snow. The wind was calmer now, only brushing the trees instead of shaking them. The sky remained gray, but at least it no longer threatened danger. Caleb let out a relieved breath. They could finally leave. He turned back to Nayeli, who sat near the fire with his coat around her shoulders. Her face still looked tired, but there was more color in her cheeks now. She watched him carefully as he stepped inside again, brushing snow off his boots. It's safe enough to travel, Caleb said. Not perfect, but better than yesterday. Nayeli nodded once. I must reach my family as soon as possible. Caleb studied her swollen ankle. She tried to hide the pain, but he had seen enough injured livestock and workers to know when someone wasn't fit to walk far. You're not traveling alone with that ankle, he said quietly. Her expression tightened. I can manage. He shook his head. You can, maybe, but not fast, and not safely. He paused, then added gently, let me help. Nayeli lowered her gaze, thinking. She understood the truth. Walking alone through deep snow with a weak ankle would slow her down until sunset. Maybe longer. The three men she mentioned could still be somewhere out here, and if more snow fell, she could get trapped again. Still, she hesitated. Accepting help from someone outside her tribe was not simple, but Caleb was patient. He didn't push. He simply waited, letting her decide. Finally, Nayeli nodded slowly. Very well. I will accept your help. For now. Caleb offered a small, respectful smile. Let's get ready. Then, he packed the remaining wood, tied the saddlebags, and brushed off Dusty's back. The horse snorted at the cold, but his ears perked up when Caleb stroked his neck. The world outside was quiet, but quiet in the mountains often meant something was waiting. With careful movements, Caleb lifted Nayeli onto the horse, making sure her injured ankle rested comfortably. She held the saddle horn gently, her posture straight, even though she leaned forward slightly from pain. Caleb mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance, guiding Dusty slowly through the thick snow. For a while, neither of them spoke. The world around them was silent, except for the soft crunch of horse hooves and the distant sound of melting snow dripping from branches. Nayeli looked around at the land with a thoughtful expression, as if she knew every mountain peak, every ridge, every hidden trail. The path east will be difficult, she murmured after a long silence. Snow covers the markers. We'll manage, Caleb replied. We'll take the lower canyon. Wind doesn't fill it as fast. She turned her head slightly, surprised. You know that path? Yes. My father used it for cattle drives when I was young. Nayeli's eyes softened with recognition. Then, we will reach the border faster. They continued riding, moving slowly but steadily. The sun, weak and pale, pushed through the clouds, just enough to cast long shadows on the snow. Caleb kept watch in every direction. Alert for movement. Something in his gut told him the men who chased Nayeli might still be searching. Nayeli shifted slightly as they rode. Caleb, she said quietly. The men, they were not simple riders. They worked for someone. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. Who? She looked ahead, her voice steady but serious. A land baron from the valley south of my people's land. He wants to take the hunting grounds and open them for his cattle. But he knows my tribe will refuse. So he sent men to scout secretly. Caleb felt anger rise inside him. Land disputes weren't new in the region, but sending armed men to force control was wrong. Your people deserve your land, he said softly. No one should take it from you. Nayeli studied him again, as if trying to understand why a rancher would say such words. You speak differently than most, she whispered. Caleb shrugged lightly. Respect is respect. Doesn't matter where someone comes from. They continued down the canyon path. The snow here was not as deep, and Dusty moved more confidently. Caleb began to relax slightly, until he noticed something strange on a rock ahead. A boot print. Fresh, not covered by snow. He narrowed his eyes. Nayeli sensed the change in his posture. What is it? Caleb didn't answer right away. He studied the prints closely. They were large, maybe made by more than one person. He heard Dusty snort again. Uneasy. Then he heard a faint echo snow shifting behind them. Caleb reacted instantly. Hold on, he whispered to Nayeli. A moment later, 3 men appeared on the ridge above them. The same men Nayeli had mentioned. Nayeli froze, her breath catching. Caleb kept Dusty steady and faced the men without fear. One of them shouted down, Hand over the woman! She's coming with us! Caleb shook his head firmly. She's injured. She needs to reach her family. That's not your concern, rancher, the man barked. She saw things she shouldn't. Caleb felt something hard and protective rise in his chest. He moved Dusty slightly, placing himself between the men and Nayeli. She isn't going anywhere with you. The men exchanged looks, surprised that a lone rancher dared to stand up to them. The leader stepped forward. You don't want trouble. Caleb kept his voice calm but steady. I already have trouble. I'm choosing the right side of it. Nayeli glanced at him, shocked by his courage, but also grateful in a silent, deep way. Then the men began stepping down the ridge. Caleb didn't wait. Hold tight, he murmured. Dusty turned sharply and galloped into the lower canyon, snow flying behind them. The men shouted and followed on foot, their steps heavy and fast. Nayeli gripped the saddle horn tightly, wincing as the movement jolted her ankle. Snow splashed around them as Dusty raced between narrow rock walls. Caleb guided him expertly, using every shortcut he knew. But the men were close. Too close. Caleb heard their footsteps echoing through the canyon. Up ahead. Nayeli pointed weakly to a narrow cut between boulders. Caleb steered Dusty through the gap just as the men reached the entrance. They tried to follow, but the gap was too tight. Dusty squeezed through, and Caleb leaned low to avoid scraping against the rocks. Finally, they reached a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of snow-covered branches. Dusty slowed, and Caleb quickly dismounted, helping Nayeli down. She leaned on him, breathing hard. He led Dusty inside just far enough to hide them from sight, then quickly brushed away the tracks leading to the entrance. They waited in complete silence. A few moments later, the men's angry voices echoed in the canyon. Where did they go? They were right here. Keep searching, Nayeli pressed a hand against her chest, trying to calm her breathing. Caleb stood beside her, watching the entrance, ready to protect her if needed. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the voices faded. The men had moved on. Caleb let out a quiet breath. "We're safe for now." Nayeli looked at him with a new expression, one mixed with gratitude, respect, and something deeper. "You risked everything for me," she whispered. Caleb met her eyes, calm and sincere. "You needed help. I wasn't going to let them take you." For a moment, neither spoke. The cave was cold, but the air between them felt warm with unspoken understanding. Caleb helped her sit against the cave wall while Dusty rested nearby. Outside, the world was white and quiet again. But they both knew danger still lingered somewhere in those mountains. Inside that cave, Nayeli saw the rancher differently, not just a stranger who saved her from the storm, but someone who risked his own peace to protect her from those who wished her harm. And Caleb realized something too. He wasn't just helping her because it was the right thing to do. He felt responsible for her, connected in a way he couldn't explain. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but inside the cave, something between them had begun to change, something neither of them expected. The cave sheltered them from the wind, but it did little to soften the cold. Caleb kept the horse calm while Nayeli rested against the stone wall, her breathing uneven from the chase. Her ankle throbbed, and though she tried to hide the pain, Caleb noticed instantly. He knelt beside her, placing Dusty's blanket under her leg to lift it gently from the cold floor. "You shouldn't be moving at all," he said softly. Nayeli looked away, uncomfortable with the attention yet grateful for it. She kept her voice steady. "I have walked through worse." "I can tell," Caleb replied, unable to hide the respect in his tone. "But you don't have to endure everything alone." She blinked, surprised by the gentle firmness of his voice. No one outside her people ever spoke to her that way. Calm, patient, as if he wasn't questioning her strength, but supporting it. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she remained quiet, letting the moment settle. Caleb peeked toward the cave entrance, checking for danger. The men's voices were gone, replaced by the soft drip of melting snow. The storm had weakened, but daylight was fading fast, turning the canyon shadows long and thick. They could not travel far before dark. He sat beside her. Not too close, but close enough to offer warmth. His shoulders relaxed a little, though his eyes remained alert. "When the sun rises, we'll head toward your land," he said quietly. Nayeli turned to him with surprise. "You will take me there? To the border of my tribe's home?" "Yes," he said simply. "You can't walk alone, and I won't leave you." Nayeli lowered her gaze, emotions stirring behind her calm expression. She was not used to receiving help without a price. In the past, ranchers avoided her people, and her people avoided them. But this man, this rancher, risked himself again and again without asking anything. "You know my people might not trust you," she said carefully. Caleb nodded. "I wouldn't trust a stranger either." Then, with a slight smile, he added, "But I trust you enough to guide me." His words softened something deep inside her chest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the flickering cave light dance across the rocky walls. Hours ago, they had been strangers forced together by a storm. Now, she felt as if the world outside mattered less than the quiet space between them. She shifted slightly, winced from the pain in her ankle, and Caleb noticed immediately. "Let me help," he said. Before she could argue, he tore a clean strip from the inside of his saddlebag and wrapped it gently around her ankle to give it support. His touch remained careful, respectful, almost cautious, as if he feared hurting her without meaning to. Nayeli watched his hands work. "You know healing?" she asked softly. "A little," he answered. "Ranch work teaches you how to fix just about everything." A small smile touched her lips. Caleb returned it briefly before glancing toward the entrance again. Nightfall came quickly. The cave grew darker, colder. Caleb built a small fire near the entrance, careful not to release too much smoke. Warm light filled the small space again. Nayeli shifted closer to it, and Caleb draped his coat over her shoulders. "You need it more than I do," he said. "You will be cold," she protested. "I'll be fine," Caleb replied, settling down on the opposite side of the fire. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the crackling wood. The calmness felt strange yet comforting. Eventually, Nayeli spoke again. "Caleb, why did you protect me from those men? Twice now." He didn't look away from the fire. "Because it was right. Because you needed someone to stand with you." Then he added, with quiet sincerity, "Because no one deserves to be hunted like that." His words struck her with unexpected force. In her life, she had seen plenty of people choose convenience over courage. But he had stepped forward without hesitation, even when he could have walked away safely. She studied his profile, the firm jaw, the tired yet determined eyes, the steadiness in his posture that made her feel protected without feeling weak. Something in her softened, more than she meant to show. After a long pause, she said quietly, "I am not used to trusting anyone outside my tribe. But you are different." Caleb finally looked at her. The firelight reflected in his eyes, making them warm and steady. "And you're stronger than most people I've met." Their gazes held for a moment that seemed longer than a breath but shorter than a heartbeat. Not romantic, not dramatic. Just human, two souls finding a quiet understanding in a frozen world. Time passed slowly. Caleb listened to the distant night sounds, alert for danger. Nayeli rested her eyes, exhausted but no longer afraid. Every now and then, she opened them to make sure Caleb hadn't drifted too far or fallen asleep. He didn't. He stayed awake, protecting the cave entrance like a silent guardian. Near midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. The fire shrank, and even with the flames, the cave felt bitterly cold. Caleb's breath fogged in the air. Nayeli saw him shiver slightly, though he tried to hide it. "You gave me your coat," she said softly. "You needed it," he replied through a shaky breath. "You will freeze," she warned. Caleb didn't argue. He simply tried to warm his hands by the fire. Nayeli watched him closely. In her culture, survival was shared. No one lived through mountain storms alone. Her ankle still hurt, but she pushed herself a little closer to him. "You helped me survive," she said calmly. "Now you let me help you." She didn't move too close, but she allowed their shoulders to share warmth. Caleb stiffened at first, unsure if it was proper, unsure if she felt forced. But when she gave him a reassuring nod, he relaxed. "I don't want you uncomfortable," he murmured. "If I was uncomfortable, I would move away," she replied simply. Her honesty settled his nerves, and for the first time since the storm began, Caleb felt his body warming again. Outside, the wind softened into gentle whispers against the canyon walls. The cave grew quieter, almost peaceful. Dusty slept near the wall, his breath slow and steady. The fire gave off a golden glow that softened the rough edges of the stone. Caleb leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, finally letting exhaustion show. Nayeli watched him with a thoughtful expression. This man, who had every reason to avoid her, had risked the storm, armed men, and hours of cold just to carry her to safety. "You are far kinder than I expected," she whispered softly, not sure if he heard. He did. He opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "I just try to do what's right." Nayeli held his gaze, the warmth between them spreading quietly through the cold air. It wasn't the fire that brought comfort. Now it was the presence of someone who chose to stay when walking away would have been easier. As dawn approached, pale light crept into the cave. Nayeli's ankles still hurt, but she felt stronger. Caleb stood, stretched, and checked outside. The sky was clearing. The world looked new again, covered in untouched snow that glittered under the morning sun. He came back inside and offered her his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. She took it, steadying herself as she stood. "Yes," she said softly. "We will finish this journey together." Their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them, something that wasn't there before the storm, before the chase, before the long night inside the cave. They were no longer two strangers from different worlds. They were two people who trusted each other. The morning came quiet and clear. The sky a soft blue after days of cold storms. Caleb helped Nayeli onto Dusty's back, taking extra care so her injured ankle would not twist. She winced only a little this time, which told him she had grown stronger. Still, Caleb stayed close, ready to support her at any moment. The journey toward her people's border began slowly. Snow covered everything, but the sunlight made it sparkle, like tiny pieces of glass spread across the land. The silence around them felt peaceful, almost calming, after all the danger they had faced. Dusty walked steadily, his hooves sinking into the snow with soft crunches. The air was cold, but without the storm's wind, it no longer felt threatening. Caleb walked beside the horse most of the way, his hand lightly touching Dusty's side to guide him. Nayeli watched him often, noticing how he never complained, never slowed down, never acted as if the journey was a burden. She could feel how much effort he was giving, and it warmed something inside her chest. "You do not have to walk," she said quietly. "You can ride." Caleb shook his head with a small smile. "Dusty will do better if I'm on the ground for now. Besides, the path might get narrow." Nayeli studied him. "You put others before yourself often." Caleb shrugged slightly. "Seems natural." She smiled faintly, though he didn't see it. She looked ahead, the mountains rising in the distance. "My people will remember what you have done." "I didn't do it for a reward," Caleb said. "I did it because it needed to be done." His simple honesty made her chest ache in a strange, gentle way. Hours passed quietly as they moved across the snowy land. The sun climbed higher, melting thin layers of frost from branches and rocks. Caleb guided them around frozen streams, and through clusters of pine trees weighed down with snow. Nayeli recognized the land, and sometimes pointed the way, showing hidden paths her people used for generations. At midday, they stopped near a flat rock where the snow wasn't too deep. Caleb helped her down, and she rested while he gave Dusty water from the canteen. Nayeli looked around at the quiet valley. "We are close," she said softly. "2 more hours and we will reach the border." Caleb nodded, but something inside him tightened. He knew their time together was ending. Once she reached her people, they would return to their separate lives. He back to his ranch, she back to her tribe. The thought felt heavier than he expected. He had grown used to her quiet strength, her calm words, her steady presence during the storm. Nayeli noticed the change in his expression. "You are thinking of something," she said gently. Caleb tried to hide it with a faint smile. "Just wondering what comes next." She looked at him with soft eyes. "For you, your ranch waits. For me, my people wait." He nodded slowly. "Yes." But both of them knew it wasn't that simple anymore. After resting, they continued. The land began to rise as they approached the foothills, leading to her tribe's territory. The snow thinned slightly, and the air grew sharper. Nayeli recognized more and more landmarks, the tall, bent pine shaped by lightning, the narrow stream that whispered softly even in winter, the ridge shaped like a resting buffalo. "These are the signs of home," she said with quiet emotion. Caleb looked around, taking in the land that meant so much to her. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. "It is more than land," she replied. "It carries our stories." Then she added softly, "Just like your ranch carries yours." Caleb nodded, thinking of his home, his father, the cattle he still needed to find. Yet strangely, none of that felt as urgent as it had before the storm. Life had shifted somehow. As they neared the final ridge, the world grew quiet again. Caleb helped Nayeli down once more so she could walk the last part if she wished. She leaned lightly on his arm for balance. Dusty followed behind them. When they reached the top of the ridge, the view opened into a wide valley dotted with winter trees and distant smoke rising from campfires. Nayeli's breath caught in her throat. "My people are there." Caleb felt her grip tighten slightly, not from fear, but from emotion. He understood. Home, after nearly losing her life, meant something deeper. He stepped back, giving her space. "This is where we part," he said quietly. Nayeli turned to him, her expression unreadable at first. "Yes. This is where our paths separate." The wind brushed lightly between them, carrying the distant smell of smoke. For a moment, neither spoke. They stood there, surrounded by silence, trying to accept something neither of them wanted to say aloud. Nayeli finally spoke. "Caleb, you saved my life. Twice. You protected me when you had nothing to gain." Caleb shook his head. "I only did what any decent man should." "No," she said firmly. "Many would have walked away. But you stayed." He looked down at the snow, unsure how to respond. Her voice softened. "I will not forget you, and I'll never forget you," Caleb replied, his voice gentle but steady. She held his gaze longer this time. Something deep passing between them. Something made not of words, but of shared struggle, shared danger, and the quiet trust they had built. Then, from the valley below, the sound of approaching horses echoed softly. Nayeli looked toward it and saw several riders wearing her tribe's colors. They were coming fast, but not with hostility. These were people searching for a missing daughter, a missing sister, a missing member of their family. Nayeli stepped forward, standing tall and proud despite her injury. Caleb stood a little behind her, watching the riders climb the ridge. When they reached the top, one of the older men dismounted quickly and hurried toward Nayeli, calling her name with relief heavy in his voice. She answered him calmly, reassuring him she was safe. The riders looked at Caleb with caution at first. But Nayeli raised her hand gently and said, "He saved me. Treat him with respect." Her words softened their expressions at once. One of the riders bowed his head to Caleb. "We thank you." Caleb nodded quietly, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the peace in their voices. After speaking with her people for a moment, Nayeli turned back to Caleb. Her expression had changed. It held the same strength he admired. But now there was warmth too. Deep and sincere. "This is where your road continues," she said softly. "And yours," he replied. She stepped closer. Just enough for her voice to reach him clearly. "The mountains taught us something. We survive by helping each other." Caleb felt those words settle deep in his chest. "Yes," he whispered. "We do." She looked at him one last time, and for a moment, neither wanted the moment to end. But her people were waiting, and Caleb had to return to his own life. Slowly, respectfully, they parted. Nayeli walked toward her people, supported gently by the elder rider. Caleb watched her go, feeling a weight in his chest, stronger than he expected. She turned once more before disappearing over the ridge and gave him a small, soft smile. Caleb gave her a nod in return. The riders led her toward the valley, and soon she was out of sight. Caleb looked across the white landscape one more time. He felt the cold air fill his lungs, felt the world settle around him. Then he mounted Dusty, pausing for a moment as the wind brushed across his face. He didn't know when or if their paths would cross again. But he knew one thing without a doubt. Meeting her had changed him, and somewhere in the valley below, Nayeli carried the same feeling. With one final look toward the distant smoke rising from her people's camp, Caleb turned Dusty toward the open land and began the long ride home, carrying with him a memory that would never fade, a bond shaped by storm, danger, and the quiet courage of two hearts learning to trust.